Hi everyone. So in this video, we'll be continuing to look at the different types of interactivity or type of systems that you have in Unity to be able to produce interactivity inside of your games. And we're going to take a look a little bit more in depth at the trigger. We looked at the trigger in a previous video where we built some terrain and created a collectathon using objects. In this particular situation, we're going to look at all of the different functions that we have inside of the game. So we're going to have three different functions that are going to check to see if the red cube object that we made in the previous video is sitting on top of a pressure plate. So what we'll do is we'll create a game object inside of our scene that we can pick up our object and put it onto, and that's where we're going to get started. So I'm going to rotate around here and create a new object inside the scene. We'll just make a cube. And I'm going to move this around here. And I'll move it above the ground. Maybe move it a little bit over here. And I'm just going to scale this down and scale it up to make it a little bit wider. Place it on the ground here. And what I'll do is I'm going to create, if we jump down to physics, I'm going to put another box collider on this object. And what we're going to do is we're going to edit this collider by focusing in on it. And I'm going to move the top part of this collider up and the bottom. And you see how I'm grabbing these little vertices here. They're on the faces of the collider. And I'm just going to move this so that it's above this new box collider, so that's above the original. And this one's going to be set to trigger. So if you look here, I set is trigger here with the little checkbox that's inside of the object. And I'm just going to lower the overall object now. So I'm going to show off the collider options here. And if I edit colliders here, so I'll make sure that this is the bottom collider, and it is. Alright, cool. So it's got a trigger on top and another collider at the bottom, and what the collider at the bottom is going to do is make it so that the cube doesn't fall through down to the floor. And the top one's going to act as though it's a trigger. Alright, cool. So I'm going to create one more thing here. I'm going to add a tag to this box. I'm going to call this tag red box here. So let's go over to our tags. I'll add a tag here. I'll hit the plus button and I'll type in red box. Alright, and let's tag the red cube, the red pickup object here, as red box. Alright, cool. Now what we want to do is we want to write a trigger script that's going to detect when we put objects onto this platform here. And what I'll do is I'll just color code this yellow for now, just so that we could see it. And let's create a script that we'll put onto this trigger so that we can detect when we put the box onto it. Alright, so let's go to our scripts folder, create a new script, and we'll call this trigger script or a trigger object. Call it trigger object. And let's open this up in Visual Studio. And for this particular class, we don't need the update and start function again. We can get rid of both of those. And I guess what we'll do to start this off is create a couple of these on trigger functions. So the first one's going to be on trigger enter. So on trigger enter. You want to make sure it's the regular on trigger enter, not the 2D version. I'm also going to create one for on trigger stay. also going to create one for on trigger exit. Alright, so the great thing about triggers is that we can detect what object is colliding with them. In this case, we want to check to see if the object is the box that we're colliding with. So I'm going to just change the name of the parameters to call here, just to simplify things a little bit. And what we'll do is we'll perform a basic check on this. So we'll say if call dot game object dot tag, and we're going to check to see if it's equal to the tag that we created, which was red box. And if it is, what we'll do is we'll debug log. And then we're going to check what the object tag is here. So we'll say call dot game object dot tag plus, and we'll put in quotes here, entered the trigger. And pretty much we're just going to check for this same instance on each one of these colliders and see what the difference is on each one of the events, and see what the collision or what the result is. So what we'll do is we'll just copy this, paste these down below, and we'll change these. So we'll say is in the trigger. We'll say exited for this one. Alright, so this is a way to check on events that are happening in your scene. These triggers are listening for when the object is either entering it, exiting it, or staying inside of it. So you could do things like perform damage over time on an on-trigger stay or an on-trigger enter, trigger a coroutine that applies damage to a player. You could have a trigger that when you open a door and the player walks into it, it loads in the next level. You could have a trigger that when the player walks into it, the AI starts spawning enemies into the scene. There's a million things that you could do with this, and this is one of those essential, fundamental things that you need inside of your game or to understand in Unity to be able to kind of script out things to happen at certain times, or even detect to see if certain objects are within one another. So in this particular example, we're going to check to see where our red box is at. I'm going to save this, and what we're going to do here is head back over to Unity, and inside of Unity we'll select our trigger here, and I'll call this trigger plate. And what we'll do is we will pick up the object to place it on there. So let's just add the script onto the trigger plate. And if we look here, it's on there. And if I hit the play button, let's pick up the red object. And then put it onto the plate. And what we could see here is inside of the console. If I open up the console, whoops, that's not what I wanted. We see red box entered the trigger, red box is in the trigger, and red box exited the trigger. So I'm guessing it's exiting the trigger because it doesn't fully envelop the trigger. Oh wait, maybe it did trigger it earlier. So let's check that again. Yeah, I have it all collapsed here. So if I uncollapse it here, red boxes and triggers being triggered over and over and over again. So collapse, what collapse will do is they'll collapse any repeating messages and you'll see them adding up here. So this has exited the trigger 4 times, entered 5 times, and it's been in there for a while. Alright, so I hope you kind of get the idea of what triggers can do and how they work. Next, we're going to take a look at another form of interactivity that's really important, and we've also kind of looked at this as well in other areas. It's the Raycast. So stay tuned.